What's up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks podcast, this time for Tuesday, January 4th. I'm your host, Justin Bales. We have a smaller 5-game slate. It's actually still a pretty solid slate because obviously we're not dealing with the 2 or 3-game slates that we have been on, basically Tuesday, Thursday. So we do have a very reasonable 5-game slate, a lot going on. Still a ton of news. The COVID news has kind of died down a little bit. I guess not necessarily died down, but it's kind of lessened a little bit when they changed the protocols essentially to 5 days before they can come back. But still plenty of going on. We still have a lot of injury news that we kind of need to cover, with it only being 5 games, not quite as much as usual. I'll also going to take you through a little bit of our projections just to kind of look at them. But before we get started with that, if you enjoy this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel. You can turn on the notifications by clicking the little bell. Comment anything that you want below. If you have any questions, I will be in here throughout the day to answer them for you. Once again, 5 games, but I'm going to try to keep my pool relatively small at each position. I don't want to go over, too much, give you guys too much information and everything. So if there's any players that you want to know about or have any questions about, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I will outline them for you, or just give you my honest opinion on whether I would be willing to play them, anything like that. But I guess we can get into, these are our projections. Obviously, they're still for last night. This is recorded at 10 p.m. beforehand, or I guess the night before. So the games aren't even over at this point, but I will quick pull them up. I do want to say that this is all available at dfskarma.com. You can find our free articles here. We also have premium content. The projections are premium. So these obviously won't be useful for the Tuesday slate, but if you go to dfskarma.com, pick up a core plays package, you can get our projections. You can also get our premium articles along with into our premium Discord, and obviously our core plays. If you want to go to chatdfs.com, that will get you into our free Discord, it's just other channels. We still do discuss quite a bit in those, really useful information as well. So you don't necessarily need to be premium to get help from this. But pulling up our projections, as you can see on here, it's just kind of at the moment, everyone, they're sorted by what we refer to as karma value, essentially how good they are for their price. You can sort by projected points. We had Nikola Jokic as the highest last night. Projected minutes, fantasy points per minute, ownership projections. And then we also have some other stuff, some more general stuff, obviously name, position, team, salary, implied team total. Then you get into stuff like assist rate, rebound rate. We have the pace boost, their usage. And then we do have projections for their floor points and for their ceiling, which obviously can help you in cash games and in tournaments. Really useful tool, though. Specifically, I know that Anthony would absolutely, if he was on here, would tell you 100% of the time he loves using the karma value. That's kind of the big thing that he enjoys on this. I do think, for me personally, it's all extremely relevant. Getting stuff like the rebounding rate, the assist rates can give you very matchup specific things. Ownership projections, or even sorting by salary, right? Like you sort by salary and then you find the ownership. And at this point, like you can see that Stephen Curry is projected for drastically less ownership. Now, obviously our karma value doesn't like him. So this might not be the best example in terms of someone that you would use to move off of specific ownership. But you kind of get the point with that. And as you scroll down and move around, there's going to be guys that are very clear, and there's going to be very clear pivots like Norman Powell and Omar Yurtseven. If you're looking strictly for the utility or something like that, very obviously Norman Powell projected over 26%, Yurtseven projected under 7%. It's just a really good spot for you to move off. The same can be said for someone like Marcus Morris Jr. and Daniel Gafford. As you can see here, Gafford actually higher in the karma value, roughly 10% lower in terms of ownership, though. So this is kind of the projections aspect that you get with our core plays package. Really, really useful. Great tool to have. So I do think that is one of the key factors of why the core plays package is so good on top of everything else that we offer. But we can move along to essentially this slate. I'll go over the injury news first. San Antonio, DeJounte Murray still out, along with Doug McDermott, Lonnie Walker, Devontae Cook. Keita Bates-Diop is questionable. On the other side, not much going on for Toronto. Isaac Bonga is questionable. Dylan Brooks and DeAnthony Melton, along with Zaire Williams, all questionable for Memphis. Then you have Xavier Tillman, John Conchar, Kyle Anderson are all still out for them. You have Rajon Rondo, who will be making his Cleveland debut, but Darius Garland is also coming back. And then Chetty Osman is out for Cleveland. Indiana is dealing with quite a bit at the moment. Karis LeVert, Isaiah Jackson, Chris Derate, Jeremy Lamb, Malcolm Brogdon, Goga Bitadze, and Keelan Martin all out. On the opposite side, Kemba Walker, Julius Randle, Nerlens Noel all out. Jericho Sims and Mitchell Robinson are both questionable. Jay Crowder still out for Phoenix, along with DeAndre Ayton, Abdel Nader, JaVale McGee. And then on the other side, essentially the only guy to necessarily note would be Tomas Satoransky, even though not a major note, but he's out for New Orleans. Then for Sacramento, you do have Rashawn Holmes out, and Terrence Davis is questionable. On the other side, LeBron James, who's essentially listed on the injury report every single night, but obviously always plays. Basically, he's probable for this game as well. So starting at point guard, this is one of the tougher positions because I do think that there's a lot of ways you can go. I'm trying to think of how to word this, but in my opinion, there's two very clear-cut options. And, you know, if you're wondering about any more expensive point guards, by all means, drop their names in the comments, but I'm just going to quickly discuss the two cheap guys that probably end up being two of the highest owned players on the entire slate. You obviously have Dwayne Washington Jr. for Indiana, 30 and 34 minutes in his last two games. He dropped 21 and 27.5 fantasy points in those games. Really good scorer in college. He's coming to the NBA. He hit 8 of 17 in his last game, made 4 3-pointers in that game, scored 20 points. Obviously, he's playing a ton of minutes at guard for Indiana because they have virtually no one. So that's just kind of how it's going to go. Still only 4,000. It's just way too cheap for him. He's probably going to be relatively close to a lock. And then the other guy, assuming he's starting, he started in their last game, 32 minutes. You have Trey Jones. Really solid option in terms of point per minute type of player. He's played 20 plus in 3 of his last 4. When he only played 20 minutes, he scored 21. When he got up to 21 minutes, he scored 30. And then obviously he played 32 minutes in his last game and dropped 28. Really, at 3,800, there's not all that much more you can ask for. Very clear-cut type of thing at point guard that those two are probably going to be pretty close to locks for this game. So I do believe that there's other options. It's just that it's so difficult to avoid, you know, the 4K players that come with that type of upside and are just getting those solid of minutes, even on a 5-game slate. So it doesn't really give you a lot of different options to pivot to or anything. Those two probably end up being two of the higher end players. And realistically, it's for good reason. There's not much reason to avoid them at this point. Moving to shooting guard, we have a lot of very solid options. I don't necessarily know. I guess 2 would stick out to me near the top. I do really like Devin Booker. I'm not worried about the matchup against New Orleans. The big problem is that Fred VanVleet is only 200 more, and VanVleet has caught fire like no tomorrow. 54 plus in 4 straight in that span. He scored over 65 in one of them. Also gets a good matchup against the San Antonio Spurs, who have not been good against point guards. And essentially VanVleet is just playing point for Toronto, even though he is shooting guard eligible. One of the better options on the entire slate. I know you kind of need to pay up for him at this point, but if you look at the last time he was actually on a slate, he was 9,800. In that game, he dropped 57. The game after, he dropped 54, and he's back down to 9,000. So it's really weird that they would kind of do that. But I mean, it's not overly surprising just based on how he played early in the season, because DraftKings seemingly makes a lot of their decisions kind of on a season-long basis rather than just what they're doing in recent games. And don't get me wrong, VanVleet's price is going to continue to go up. I'm assuming next game it's probably going to jump pretty high to around 10,000, but we get the discount tonight, and that's kind of all that we're looking for. As you move down a little bit more, I want to say Malik Monk is a really good option. I just also am worried about what happens when his shot isn't falling, because he was inserted into the starting lineup and bigger minutes on Christmas in 5 games since then. 27 plus fantasy points in 4 of the 5. He stalled out at 23 in the one game just because he doesn't really add all that many peripherals. But 40 fantasy point upside. He's still only 5,100. Gets the elite matchup against Sacramento, who's terrible against guards. The big issue is that Malik Monk shot 50% or better in every single one of those games. He's shot 40% or better from 3 in all of the games. And you just really have to wonder, when does it slow down? When does he shoot 1 of 6, 1 of 7 from 3? And if you get him on that night, he just doesn't add too many peripherals generally. So it's going to be tough for him to really go off. The alternative is that he's still only 5,100 and he gets the matchup against Sacramento, who obviously allow a ton of points to guards. Malik Monk is playing absurdly well, shooting 50% or better in each of his last 5. So I guess for me personally, I would assume that it continues to go. This wouldn't be the game that I would just kind of expect Malik Monk to more or less fall off the planet. So I don't know. For me, Malik Monk at 5,100 is one of the better options. I do think that it's a really good play. And then as you go down a little bit more, I think there are some options, but Quentin Grimes has performed well on a per minute basis. Essentially when he's getting more minutes. Flashed 40 fantasy point upside before. Obviously, he got 40 minutes in that game. New York's dealing with some issues in their rotation. I would expect Grimes to get around 20 minutes tonight. The big thing is that he can beat value in 20 to 25 minutes because he's only 3,800. So I'm not expecting the 40 fantasy point game. But when you look at his last game against Toronto, obviously 22 minutes, 25.75 fantasy points. That's the type of game he can have, especially when you consider that he's going up against Indiana, who is also without a ton of guards in their lineup. So going to be a bit of an easier matchup for someone like Grimes. And at 3,800, I do think that you can take a shot on him. Moving to small forward, it's so tough because at the top, there's no reason not to just play LeBron. If you watched him against Minnesota, he played 39 minutes, but he didn't really play all that hard. He still dropped over 50 fantasy points. He scored 68 plus in his 4 before that. He scored nearly 80 against Portland in 29 minutes. Just imagine what would have happened if they kept that game close, right? So LeBron James is really at this point one of the best fantasy options, specifically with Anthony Davis out. It's tough to avoid him. He's up to 11.4, and it feels like he should easily be at minimum 12,000, especially because we know that DraftKings is willing to price people around that. So I do think that James is probably the best spend up on this entire slate. Not that there really are that many spend up options. I think it's clear cut that, he's the top of the top, but shouldn't be overly difficult to get him with the other guys at point guard because there's so much value there. I don't generally like small forward. Tonight isn't all that different. I do think there are some options. Cameron Johnson sticks out. He's shooting well. Gets a solid matchup against the Pelicans, and he's starting at power forward and just playing better. He's still only 5,200 as long as Jay Crowder is out, and really you have the guys out at center as well, and DeAndre Ayton and JaVale McGee. But Cam Johnson does come with quite a bit of upside, and then you have the Indiana Pacers guys, just because they're going to have to play minutes. Torrey Craig played 21 in his last game, 32 before that. He's the risky option, but still comes with quite a bit of upside. Justin Holiday, I would say, is the safer option, a little bit more expensive, but it doesn't quite come with the same upside. I think between the two, I would slightly prefer Holiday. I do think that either one can be used for their prices. I just believe that Holiday is, I would say, significantly safer at this point, because we know that Craig isn't necessarily locked into the same minutes as Holiday. And Craig has gone, 20, 25 minutes where he's just not scoring all that well and doesn't do anything. The big thing is if he gets 30 minutes, he could also drop 40 plus fantasy points. And we've seen that in the past as well. So cash games, I probably lean towards Holiday. GPPs, I think it's more of a toss up. But if you want the pure upside, I would say Torrey Craig in that situation. Moving to power forward, there are a few options that are kind of more expensive. Obviously, Sabonis is really the only super high-priced guy we have with Julius Randle out. I think that Sabonis would probably be the top option. Just everything's running through him, essentially, with no Karis LeVert, no Malcolm Brogdon. I believe he's coming off of a 60-plus fantasy point game. He scored almost 60 in the game before that, and he's locked into massive minutes. So I do think that Sabonis is probably the guy you're playing if you're trying to get up or near the top, I guess I would say. As you move down a little bit more, I think you probably, at this point, really, I don't know. There's two guys that stand out. The first one is pretty clear cut in Obi Toppin, assuming he starts for Julius Randle again. He played 40 plus minutes in his last game. 45 fantasy points, I believe, and just comes with a ton of upside. Specifically, when he's getting the minutes. Slightly more expensive than him is Jalen Smith, who's playing bigger minutes with multiple players out for Phoenix, but he hasn't played more than, I guess he played 29 minutes in his first game, but he hasn't played more than 27 minutes since. He's still only 5,500, and he scored 28 fantasy points in each of those games, or at least 28 fantasy points. He's coming off of a 39 fantasy point game. And we're not really that worried about him against New Orleans. Doesn't necessarily have the size to stick with Jonas Valanciunas, but Jalen Smith has always been a good per minute fantasy option. So I do think that he's a really good play. Out of the two, I think it's clear cut that Obi Toppin's going to be the chalky guy at only 5,200, but both of them really can be used there. And then as you move down, I guess I'll save one for center. There's one that's center out. There's two guys, one center eligible. The other one that isn't center eligible is Devin Facil. Multiple guys out for San Antonio. Facil locked into 41 minutes in his last game, dropped 38 fantasy points. He can add steals at a very high rate. He can also score extremely well and then add a few more peripherals in terms of rebounds and assists. Good matchup against Toronto. I actually think that Facil is one of the better plays on the slate at only 4,400. He's also small forward eligible, so multiple ways that you can use him. And I do think that he's a really, really good option there. Moving to center, I think even though the matchup on paper looks difficult in terms of season-long stuff, and he hasn't been producing overly well, he's really pricey. I think that Jonas Valanciunas is a very, very high upside option. Jalen Smith isn't going to be able to stick with his size. Nothing to there. I guess it doesn't take anything away from Jalen Smith, but it's pretty clear that Jonas Valanciunas is the one that's going to have the advantage there. They may even give Bismack Biyombo a few more minutes just to try to keep up with the size, but also I don't expect Bismack Biyombo to be able to guard Valanciunas either. He just doesn't always necessarily attack. He hasn't really been taking the 20 shots in a game. His rebounds have been kind of up and down. But I think that he comes with plenty of upside in this specific matchup. 9,300 is a bit pricey, but I would be willing to take the shot there. As you move down a bit more, I think that you can obviously go Miles Turner. Once again, basically everyone is out for Indiana. So Turner should be locked into bigger minutes. He should play, slightly below 40, I would assume again. Comes with plenty of upside, double upside. He can contribute in each of the 5 categories. I don't mind the matchup against New York, who's also dealing with their own stuff. Speaking of them, on the opposite side, you have Mitchell Robinson. I think he's completely fine with no Nerlens Noel. He always comes with plenty of upside. It's plenty of risk. It's a little bit troubling, especially knowing that he's dealing. I guess he had a false positive test. Okay, I initially thought that he tested positive for COVID, so I was going to say he's dealing with probably the aftermath of COVID, but I believe they cleared him and said that it was a false positive, which means then obviously he's not going to have any real issues coming from it. I don't know. I do think that Robinson's fine. That's strictly a GPP play for me, though. Probably wouldn't really go there in cash games, even though he is really cheap. Then you have Damian Jones at 4,000. It's just way too cheap. 29 minutes in his last game, really dominated. Assuming he's starting again, that would be the big thing. If Tristan Thompson's starting or anything, I'm not going to use Damian Jones. And then underneath him, you have Brandon Clark, who's finally getting more minutes for Memphis and has really been heating up. 3,800, and he's the kind of kid that can score 35 plus fantasy points in only 20 to 25 minutes. So 3,800 is a pretty terrible price tag for him, to just kind of put it lightly, but that's kind of where we're at this point. That about does it. Just overall for the slate, just the easy way of breaking it down, it's so very obvious that you're going stars and scrubs. That's just the type of slate it is, and it's weird because normally guys like Domantas Sabonis, who's not even 10,000, I don't believe, right? Yeah, 9,900. That's not really the stars and scrubs type thing because it's not a super expensive price tag. But when you look at plugging in Sabonis, plugging in LeBron, and then you can probably get one more star really if you wanted to. It's just a great way to construct your lineup. I think it's going to be pretty chalky because you have very obvious salary relief options that people want to use. With that said, that's everything that I have for you guys tonight. Once again, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel. Anyone that you want to know about, please feel free to drop in the comments. I will let you know what I think about them. And I will be back tomorrow. I believe Spike should be on it for what should be a much bigger slate. Good luck tonight, though.